Oh yeah, our new guest is ready. Lisa Gibbs, you are ready on stage to meet our great Danish audience. They are really thrilled to meet you because I think you have some keynotes, takeaways for us today regarding artificial intelligence. Let's say it's a kind of new boy in class and we don't know whether he's a bit scary or we have to team up with him. So please, let me welcome you. How is it to be here today?
Oh, it's wonderful. I was telling you it's my first time in Denmark.
Yeah.
I have to tell you that last night I had a dream that I was ready to come speak to you all today and I was in the wrong country. I can't even tell you where I was. And then when I managed to make sure I was in the right country, everything was going wrong. None of the technology worked. So I don't know what was happening in my brain last night, but so it feels like success just to even be here on stage.
Oh,
so
that's good.
I'm really happy to be here.
Lisa, take it away with the audience, and we'll be happy to hear what you have to tell us.
All right,
Thank
great.
you.
Well, again, thank you for having me, and I'm so grateful to the organizers for inviting me. I'm based in New York City, and it's been a wonderful experience to see Denmark and be here. It's funny to me that I am coming after Jonas of Lego, because as I was saying in the car on the way here, I think to some extent I'm bringing a little bit of the anti-fun to the whole conversation about technology. I think we can be pretty sure that underneath all of the fun and play at Lego, there's a tremendous amount of discipline and process around how they achieve those results. And so it's great to have that experimental culture and be able to play, but we can't forget about all of the underpinnings of that are so important. And I come from the news business where accuracy, trust, facts, these are things that drive what we do, and our tolerance for mistakes is incredibly low. And so when it comes to any technology, but certainly artificial intelligence, these are things that drive us to be fairly cautious. And so I hope today that some of my own experience in the news business can be of help to you all as you think about what you need at your business in order to effectively use these technologies. I'm going to give you a little bit of a presentation, and you will see immediately that news agencies do not have the presentation skills of a Lego. No video, no music, just a lot of very simple slides, which is symbolic, really. But I will give you a little bit of a presentation and hope to have a conversation with you all at the end and welcome you into questions. So again, I work for the Associated Press, which is a global news agency that is essentially licensing journalism to other media outlets, including some of those here in Denmark. And so we are producing thousands of stories and photos and videos each day. And so you can imagine how some of these technologies can really help in making our production more efficient and helping us to serve audiences better. But again, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own experiences, and hopefully the technology will work. So when I started at AP, I ran the business news department. I had 60 reporters and editors covering financial markets and corporations and technology. And I had a problem. 4 times a year, when all of these companies reported earnings, my staff had to drop everything they were doing to get geared up to be able to churn out lots of stories about corporate earnings. And I do that's what my head felt like during that time. Now, in the world of business, earnings are very, very important to investors, but they often don't make what we would call news. They are kind of like the vegetables of business journalism. They have to be done, but nobody's very excited to do it. So even with dropping everything else they were doing, no matter how interesting, changing schedules so that people were starting at 6 a.m., going all the way to 9 p.m., at our best, we were able to write about 300 stories per quarter. And I use this image of robots here because, ironically enough, my journalists often told me that they felt like robots during earnings season when they had to sit at their desk and churn out these kinds of stories. So why not bring in the robots to do some of that work? And so we worked with a company specializing in natural language generation and a data firm, and we created a system for automating corporate earnings reports. And in many cases, suddenly, we were getting stories out to the public within minutes or even seconds of the report going public. And so we went from 300 stories to 3,600 earnings stories per quarter. And instead of then focusing on writing a lot of routine earnings stories, our reporters were really able to dig into the news, determine what was interesting, and do investigative work, trends reporting. We calculated that automating earnings stories saved us the equivalent of 3 full-time journalists per year, and we could deploy that time elsewhere into stories that the public actually cared about. Now, this was not 3 years ago, 5 years ago. This was nearly 10 years ago. And while natural language generation is not necessarily considered artificial intelligence the way we think of today, at the time, this was revolutionary, the idea of a journalism company using essentially software, automation software, to produce content. And that began a journey for the Associated Press where we created a working group around artificial intelligence and identifying other areas where natural language generation, natural language processing, and other types of AI-related technologies and machine learning could impact our organization and help us deliver value to our customers. Now, of course, we have generative AI, which has brought a whole new level of discussion to this. Rather, this was not rocket science, what we were doing before, but now everybody is excited about it. And everybody is rushing to identify all of the different ways that generative AI might be useful in helping us write stories, research, summarize stories, all kinds of things. And everybody is going a little bit crazy. And for me, some of the debate feels like Back to the Future, when 10 years ago, people were asking me, aren't you worried that the robot is going to take your job? And all of those kinds of things. Very similar debates. And so I think the point I want to make here, and I'll make throughout, is that with every new innovation, going back to the history of technology and innovation, from the beginning when we moved from sending news via the telegraph to using the personal computer, to Photoshop, to blockchain, to artificial intelligence, there are always these kinds of periods where we're pushing the boundaries and then pulling back and figuring out what to do. We know certainly that some media outlets have jumped in and maybe trying too hard. You all probably are aware of the famous incident where a magazine actually used a chatbot to generate quotes allegedly from the F1 champion Mick Schumacher, and they were widely criticized for that, and an editor got fired. And there's actually a long history of these kinds of mistakes. Again, this is nothing new. This is one of my favorite slides from back in the early automation days, when the LA Times had to apologize for a mistaken tweet about quite a significant earthquake that turned out was based on bad data from 1925. So again, this is just nothing new. We try things, we make mistakes, we learn, we get better. And so, this is kind of the way of the world, and we should keep that in perspective. So will AI transform journalism, or will it ruin journalism? I think that while it is important and interesting to debate these kinds of things, I think the real question for me is, why is it that it has taken so long for us as an industry to really use these technologies and experiment with it? And what I think is that, in fact, we have dramatically underinvested in technology, and we do not have the skills in place nor the processes to properly deploy these kinds of technologies and really use them in ways that are positive. Coming up to that view, that's where I'm looking from when I'm seeing, hey, like the question about whether or not generative AI is going to ruin journalism and media as we know it, it is easy to forget that for a lot of companies, they're not even using the most basic technology and are hardly ready for even things like generative AI. In 2021, AP surveyed 200 news organizations in the United States, mostly small media organizations serving local communities. So not big agencies like AP, not BBC, not Reuters, not New York Times, big companies that have a little bit more capabilities around these things, smaller news organizations, about their understanding of AI and what it could do, and also what did they wish that they had that would help them solve problems. It was somewhat shocking to me that in 2021, the vast majority of smaller news organizations were not even using the most basic automated transcription tools for audio or video, things that have an obvious and dramatic impact on efficiency. And this just goes to show that we actually have a real innovation gap in our industry. And again, I think that this is important to remember, and how do we overall build the capacity of journalism and media to innovate? These are things that really kind of drive I do a lot of thinking about. So why is this? Why is it that they're still not using basic tools that, as my example shows, have been around for 10 years easily? Well, they don't understand them, but really I think, it gets down to they are so financially stretched that they don't have the resources to invest in learning new tools or trying new things where they don't perceive it to be an obvious win. They cannot afford to spend time on things that may or may not work. And this is part of what has fueled this overall underskilling and underinvestment in technology. Certainly, they do have real concerns about the integrity and the ethics of machine-assisted news, no question. And they have no culture of being involved with academics or startups that have these kinds of expertise that could be bringing them into the newsroom. And again, I just get back to this core issue. As a news business, when we are constantly fighting to just stay in business and achieve profitability, we become much more risk averse, and investment in what might be considered innovation or basic or change just kind of falls by the wayside, gets put on the back burner, so to speak. So these are issues that I worry about very much. And so we don't really, this is not about, do we have the technology to do cool things and have fun and experiment? We have a massive implementation problem. We don't have the capabilities at our companies to actually use and try these properly. So I worry in this environment that in all of the hype and genuine interest in generative AI and what it can do, this leads to mistakes because there's no established infrastructure for figuring out how do we test these things properly and have quality control before we can are ready to show them off to the public. And a situation like this really cries out for a framework for helping news organizations and, by extension, the larger media industry to really guide them along the way in figuring out how to do this. And here is a framework. We came up with this out of our interviews and surveys of the 200 smaller media organizations that I spoke about. And just for your own interest, the reason we call it a local AI usage framework, because I mentioned we did speak to largely smaller local news outlets serving specific communities, states, cities, that kind of thing. It also happened to be a project that was funded by the Knight Foundation, which is a US-based philanthropy that is interested in helping journalism. And they gave AP funding to do this survey, develop this framework, actually create a pitch process where we invited the newsrooms we talked to submit AI-related projects to us for us to build. And so we produced the survey. We did a 6-unit course designed to help train other media organizations in what is AI and what are all the different ways you can use it. We produced the framework, and we're currently now finishing up the 5 projects that we've been working on in partnership with several universities, such as Stanford University, Northwestern University, and we're going to be unveiling those later this year. So again, like, what does it mean to be AI ready? And in some sense, what we're talking about really is innovation ready. For AI in particular, of course, it's really, to me, it's not even really about AI, it's about data and how data skilled is your organization. Do you have a system for managing data? Are your employees data literate? Which in journalism is absolutely not a guarantee of any kind. Do you have a very clear process for testing and quality control? I think one of the unsung aspects of this is the communication strategy around it. Many people asked me, how did my journalists react to the fact that we were automating corporate earnings or using other AI solutions in news, such as, algorithms to help sift through social media and detect news, all sorts of things like that. And I would say that we had very little issues with our journalist reaction, and that is because we had a very methodical and thoughtful communication plan in place where we were very clear with everybody what was the problem we were trying to solve. Here were the potential solutions we were considering. We invited everyone to have a hand in testing the solution, and then just communicated the results along the way. And so I think that there was broad understanding of why we were using these tools. And of course, all of this would have failed if we, in fact, did eliminate jobs as a result of these projects, and in fact, we did not do so. They saw the results, that they were able to have time to do more interesting stories. And so obviously, you have to be authentic and truthful in what you're saying. And so after all of that sort of practical, non-fun, discussion, I mean, there's no question that these technologies can be hugely powerful in helping us compete in today's market. We can use these technologies. I mean, the thing I'm most excited about generative AI is that it accelerates our ability to do what we call versioning, essentially create multiple versions of the same story for multiple multiple audiences. So the 500-word version, the 200-word version, the short video, the long video, all of that kind of thing. Many people, I think, want to read stories in bullet point fashion. And we would never hire people just to rewrite stories in multiple ways, but this technology, I think, can really enable us to do that, trained on our own journalism, to be clear. And then again, freeing journalists to do distinctive, original work, which after all, that curious communication aspect is that's why we're all in this business, right? So we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to do that as much as possible without being, chained to our desks, transcribing video, writing stories, doing things that really are not journalistic responsibilities. I'm going to stop there with the presentation and just talk a little bit more about kind of our own observations and what we're seeing. I do want to say a few words about generative AI in that I think what's a bit of a double-edged sword. There are more people than ever before interested in AI. I mean, when I was doing some of those early projects, it was really seen very much as kind of this weird project going on and not very interesting and scary, complicated. But now you have so many people interested in playing around with what it can do. So that is a positive in the sense that you can now bring them into the conversation about developing solutions. But of course, as I said, the downside of that is that can lead to mistakes unless you have very careful practices and principles. So my company has done things like communicated standards, making clear that these tools are not to be used for anything that's publishable content. We have working groups figuring out how do we enhance our existing products, how do we develop new products. And then finally, although I'm thankfully not in the legal department, our legal department is for the first time really heavily involved in these conversations. I think the risk that these technologies pose to our intellectual property and ownership of the content we're producing are quite serious, and our company is very much interested in uniting, collaborating with other media companies to kind of develop a legal position and protect everybody's intellectual property to make sure that the original content we all are creating is not used by others and that they make profit on and we do not. So that is a little bit of an interesting angle there. But anyway, again, I hope you've learned something. The framework, by the way, if those of you are more interested in that or want to see some of the work we did do, we also did a webinar on ChatGPT a couple of months ago. We had 1,500 people attending live. You can watch the video. We brought experts together to talk about, including from the BBC, Shibstead, and lots of other places to talk about their ideas of the potential for it. And those are all available on ai.ap.org. So you're welcome to go there and see the framework, see our report, watch the videos, and learn more about that, should you be interested in doing so. I would love to have a conversation and take some questions or hear your own thoughts about how we use these technologies properly. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
We have. Oh, Drew is running in the back. Yeah, somebody has a question. Great.
Hi, my name is Ida Ebbensgaard, incoming fellow at University of Southern Denmark in AI. When you went from 300 stories to more than 3,000 stories, which considerations did you make yourself about creating a content mill, knowing that we have this feeling of people being overwhelmed by the amount of news, and this will, of course, accelerate from here?
Yes, that's absolutely a concern. Keep in mind that our job was covering the business and corporate world for thousands of other media organizations, in different countries, in different states in the US. And so, for example, companies that were based in this state or that country, if we were only writing 300 earnings, we were unable, in many cases, to deliver journalism about their home companies that they would have been interested in. And so when your mission includes providing lots of information like that, these technologies can be helpful. Your question kind of gets to some interesting points about how you design these projects, being very clear about the universe of data, the universe of content that you're going to be producing, what it can do and what it can't do. I call them stories, but really they are snapshots. We created very, very simple stories, even of, say, 100 words, that were very straightforward to minimize the risk of error. Also creating a team whose job was to essentially spot, fact check the accuracy of those reports when they were coming out. So, I think that the value case for doing that kind of project is different for a news agency like mine that's really covering news around the globe versus a smaller media outlet that maybe is serving one community, or their audience has different information needs and that kind of thing. So, like, just one final point. Financial companies were actually paying for that stream of earnings from us, so we knew that there was a business case for it. But again, we're already drowning in a sea of content, and just because we can use these technologies to produce more, does that mean the audience really wants that, or how are we going to do it? Which reminds me, and I'm sorry, I do want to take more questions, but it reminds me of another point. The Swiss media company Tamedia has done, there's a innovation leader there that has done a lot of work around personalization. And when we think of personalization, usually what we think of is making sure we're surfacing journalism to the person coming to your website, and we know what their interests are. So they've clicked on these sports articles before, or they've clicked on these politics articles before, and so we can, guess that they're interested in those kinds of stories. But what Tamedia has done, and others have questioned, is why are we producing one story as if everyone has the same, is interested in the same facts about that particular story? The example he used was a story about a new advancement in breast cancer treatment. So if you're a woman between the ages of, let's say, 30s and 50s, your interest in that breast cancer research is probably very high. But if you're a man, well, you certainly have relatives that may have been impacted, but your degree of personal interest is not quite the same. But why are we producing the same story for each of those people as if they care in the same way? And so he had proposed that we create an AI-based tool that would actually help us truly personalize an individual story for different audiences based on demographics. Now, there's all kinds of potential issues with doing that, but I think the idea is really fascinating in that if we all could figure out how to really use these tools to truly serve the audiences with the information they need to function in today's society and in smart ways, I think it could be an ultimate positive, and we would not be contributing to content overload, echo chambers, polarization, and those kinds of things that we're unfortunately seeing now.
I think that's really interesting, Lisa, because you said that you really increased number of journalist products. I mean, raising from 300 to, what did you say, more than 3,000?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a point there, because is it quantity or is it quality? I mean, there's a big difference between those two things. So did you do any feedback on what did the users say to that overload of products?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think for those who were interested in just simply getting information fast, mm-hmm. You know, if it's truly like a breaking news kind of thing, you know, being able to have access to information as quickly as possible, if that has value, then technology like this is very effective. Mm-hmm. There are many other kinds of journalism, obviously, where that is not the value. We're telling human stories, we're doing investigations, we're holding governments accountable. You know, like that has a different value proposition, and so you know we would not think of anything. People have asked me, would we ever use that kind of automation technology in covering elections in the U.S., which there are thousands and thousands of them, and the answer is absolutely not, because in that case, we are so concerned about the integrity of the data and the integrity of the story that we would not risk even
that would be too risky.
Any error in that. I mean, some irony here is that we had done an assessment of human error rate versus robot error rate. Journalists make lots of math errors or typos. Robots do not do so. And actually, we found that the robot error rate was lower than the human error rate. The issue there is bad data equals bad story. And as you saw from the example about the LA Times famous 1925 earthquake tweet, I mean, no, you know, the robot didn't really make an error. The robot just spit out what the data told it to do. And so, you know, even really the term robot journalism is a little bit misleading. I mean, humans are creating the template. Humans are choosing the data. You know, humans are designing the project. So, you know,
luckily,
this is yet another rant of mine, as you can tell.
Yeah, I observed a question here in the front. Do we have a microphone? Yes, coming up. Great.
Hi, Torek from NXTV. I was thinking about your framework and your tools for the journalist in that. And especially you talked about shortening articles and version articles. I was wondering, and you said that you trained your own model on your articles for that. So did you use OpenAI for that, or Hugging Face, or did it make any significance other than just using the raw model?
Yes, so I should be clear about that. And remember, this was 2014. When I say we, so in the earnings case, we actually assigned a team of journalists to write the templates using our own standards. So that in and of itself was not trained on content. We have done other projects around summarization, where we have worked with, you know, input the 500-word story and spit out the 200-word summary or whatever the case is. In that case, we worked with a startup called Agolo, which were the experts in machine learning and linguistics, and they worked with us to design the system, and they did obtain a huge training set of data of our human-written summaries versus the stories to be able to train that algorithm to do that. And I should say here that AP's strategy, for the most part, has been to work with startups on projects of this kind. We do not have a massive data science team. We have not, I mean, obviously we have people in technology who work on these things, but with all of this, you have to make a decision, buy, build, or partner. right? And in our case, we have always not only decided to partner, but in many cases ended up investing in the startups that we work with. So in that sense, our AI strategy became also in some ways an investment strategy for us as well. Certainly not every company does that or should do that. There are many examples of companies staffing up and building, creating their own team of data scientists and developers to work on that kind of thing. We have so far not done that. We have brought in partners such as startups or universities.
Question from the back.
Hello, Lars from TV2. Can you share some insights on upskilling of the news teams? And also, have you made changes to the team composition, adding new competencies, backgrounds, or skills?
To your first question, this is a challenge for us. I think bringing in more journalists with data skills is something we've been able to do over time. Frankly, part of the reason that we have partnered with startups, as I mentioned, was also because it was a way of kind of quickly bringing those skills into the newsroom and skills that we did not have in-house. And I think what we felt like, because technology changes so quickly, there's arguably some advantages to being able to identify the right startup in the moment, or the right university team in the moment, rather than hiring or training for skills that may, in a couple of years, be outdated. To your second question, I think one of the things we've been doing is pulling together people from all across the company. It's very important that these be cross-function efforts, so you have not just technology in the room, but product and sales and news and standards, and that everybody is in a room together talking about what should we do, how, what are the risks, all of those sorts of things. But primarily we're collecting our own staffing across the company.
Can you mention a few topics, Lisa, regarding the biggest mistakes or errors? I mean, lots of people in here, I guess, are willing to sort of jump into this new world with artificial intelligence, but where do you seek the big, let's say, warnings, red alerts? Where do you see those?
So I'm not sure that this is I feel like I need to think about that question for a few days, but certainly, kind of the rogue experimenter, someone who's playing around and having fun and oops, that just got published. I think those kinds of things are what, something that we worry about, and, setting up procedures to prevent that from happening. That's certainly one. I know that when we were doing the surveys I mentioned, again, we had 200 news organizations fill out a pretty extensive survey, and then we did follow-up in-depth interviews with 25 of them. And I just can't stress enough the lack. Most just want to be told, please tell me the 5 tools that will help me right now. I don't want to have to go out and research which event detection tool is the best, which automation tool is the best, which chatbot is going to help me do my work. Please just tell me, and then help me train my staff to use it. So that's why I say none of this is a technology problem. But it's a serious implementation problem. And I think that is the thing. This is not exactly the question you ask, but if we can't figure some of that out, we will continue to have a growing innovation gap in media, where you have certain companies who are able to do all of these things and many others who are still kind of struggling along with trying to do everything they need to do for their communities with very little resources. So again, that's not quite answering your question.
No, but you're in it. I mean, I get your point. What in terms of being inspired by the ones you think are front runners in this field, who can we look up to, be inspired by in this field?
Well, I'll say a couple things. First of all, there are many examples, and I won't get to all of them here. I'll leave many out. I think Gibbs has been doing really fantastic work in this area, as has the BBC News Lab. There are lots of individual people who kind of on their own have really figured a lot of things out. And when you watch, if you watch the webinar I mentioned, we featured a guy who runs a one-man shop who was trying to cover his local community, and he's using GPT and other things to kind of help him create summaries from City Hall agendas and documents. And I actually think that this is a potentially transformative use for democracy as coverage of local governments or any government has decreased. Can we use technology to kind of bring back information to the public? I also want to call out an organization called Partnership on AI, which is bringing together news and media companies, but also technology companies and universities, and really a diverse mix of players to help create ethical frameworks for using these technologies. And that's partnershiponai.org. And they are doing really terrific work in this area. And if your company is thinking about needing a set of principles or guidelines or wanting to understand, they are really doing excellent work in that area. They also have a list of tools in Airtable that could also be helpful just in terms of identifying some of the tools that are out there.
Great. Do you have a last question? Yes, please.
Hello, Morrowind Williams from the BBC. It's about transparency and how much we tell people what we're doing. I see the editor of the Financial Times has just said, we will tell you when we are using these tools, which seems to be quite a laudable thing to do. What's your thought on that? Is it an important thing to do to show when we're using it?
Absolutely, and we've been doing that from the very beginning. All of the stories we produce using natural language generation have a disclosure line indicating that, and we are committed to transparency around those kinds of things. What's interesting about that, though, is that I wonder if over time, these things evolve. Yeah. And what seems very new and innovative right now, in 10 years from now, may seem like, we used Google to search for, we don't disclose things like that. I often use the example that, and I don't remember exactly the year, but there was a point in time when AP, if we transmitted a photo digitally, we said that. Or when we started using digital cameras, rather, we would disclose that, because of course using digital cameras was this massive change from the old way of shooting film, processing it in a dark room, and all of that kind of thing. I mean, imagine today if you saw a disclosure about a photograph being taken using a digital camera, you would think that that was some antique or a mistake. And so that's why I say yes, very important to be transparent with our audiences and disclose, but I do wonder, how those principles will change.
It might change
over time.
Yeah, thank you. That will be the last point from you, Lisa. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah. Watch in the time and grab a cup of coffee. I'll see you back in 11 o'clock. See you.